Okay, so in the last video we went through this one. I just spent a little bit more time to develop it to show you how you can take it from being something that's a little bit indicated to having a little bit more finish to it. But the basic step was the structure and then the light and shadow. So in the next part we'll just do that one more time. And why don't we do it to the Godfather for something different? Okay, and again, the goal is going to be to take you through steps that I would want to see you use in homework. The head's already been laid in. That way we don't have to go through, or you don't have to watch me develop the structure again. I'm going to set up my brush so that it's softer edge, and then here from the angle, like I'm holding it on the side. And so your homework will first involve you getting the thumbnail done. So step one is, what is I guess I could bring this over a bit. How would you break this down? Like we've talked a lot about techniques of drawing, but also how those techniques implicate a type of storytelling. So what is value being done, or what is it being used to develop in this picture? So that's what I'm thinking about in terms of a thumbnail. So this could be really small. I'm dividing up the frame just so I could see where the head sits. It's kind of, in this case, favoring that one side. So there's a bit of a diagonal, which means there's a feeling of movement. Here's the shoulder, and then that's it. So I'm just getting a block in as to where that would go, and then my step from there is going to be big light and shadow patterns with almost no detail. So I see a big block of shadow back here, and so I'm just drawing that shape. So this is all dark, and then it blends into his jacket. So I'm going to continue that shape here because it becomes the bow tie. It's also the cast shadow from his face. There's a little triangle here. That's the negative space around the bow tie. Here's the line here of the jacket. And so I'm kind of reversing the way I see. I'm not thinking about line anymore. Now I'm just thinking of pattern, just shape. And so it's a different facility, right? This is about analyzing and knowing what the structure of the face is. Then when I'm working more in an observational way, I'm just looking to design pattern. So here's the opening of the jacket, and then let's ignore his hand. So here's the jacket here, and then like some shapes for the hand. Then I think that we could also blend the shape into the hair. And then this is the forehead here. And then when I go into the face, there's like a dark for the eye socket, nose, cast shadow off the nose. Then I'm going to just simplify that, and then mouth, yeah, and chin. Okay, so now I'm going to fill all that in. And remember, when I'm thinking of this, my step for thinking through the design is what part of the value scale is used and what are the percentages. So this one would be 60% dark, a lot of dark here, maybe 30% light, because all of that window and then the tux is a lot of the image, and then 10% mid, and the mid is just the face. I'm not for sure on that, but that's my first guess. And then in terms of story, excuse me, the majority of this, or actually the whole movie, if anybody's seen The Godfather, is all shot from light above. So you have all this strong light above, and these types of settings or scenes is a great way to emphasize the skull, right? Because like you see the forehead, you see the top of the cranium, the eyes are set into these deep pockets of shadow, and so that looks like a skull. And so maybe the use of lighting in this movie is to emphasize the skull. That's the story. The skull matches the theme of the movie because it's a movie about death and family and people killing each other, which the skull is a really strong symbol for. So this is the type of thinking that I want you to play with when you break down the way that these pictures were planned. Like what is the light used for? Don't get caught into the fallacy that, the story is a rendering, because it's not. The rendering is just something to keep you interested. But the way that light is used is the most important thing. Now that I'm done here, homework would be, let's set up our structure. So take as long as you need to do that. It's best to spend more time as opposed to less, because no amount of light is going to fix for that. It's not going to make it look any better just by putting a lot of light over it. And then the last thing is start to find our core shadow. So the steps for making this longer drawing is I'm going to look for the core shadow, just like we did on the last one, and trace it by way of 4 edges. So if I start at the top, let's see, the top is hair. So I'm going to say light is coming from the top like we examined, and then the hair is the most prominent break between light and shadow here. Hair is a very fine, soft form, so I'm going to give this a really gradated edge, slow edge. So you have that. That hair, shape of hair, casts a shadow. So there's my soft versus hard edge, and that goes across the forehead. It kind of does this. So that's moving around a ball. It's just going across that surface. Now this is a ball lit from above. So that I'm going to make core shadow. Core shadow is the darkest, but then as I get further away, I want to soften that until it just feels like it gradually becomes the light. So soft edge, just this nuanced edge that has no really clear beginning and end. And then when that reaches the bottom, this becomes more of a cast shadow. So it kind of ends down here. When that form ends, now it's making a cast over the wrinkles in the forehead, and then eventually over the outside of the brow. So it kind of rolls that way. Now I've found myself on this edge. So remember, all corners, like all the lines that we set up here, can be softened into one of your 4 edges. So let's say, just to make that a line, eventually needs to become an edge. We don't see lines, we only see edges. Lines are an abstraction for what we know. So the forehead is most like a box. So I'm going to do a sharper edge, maybe somewhere in between a cylinder and a box. So that line now goes away, and I'm covering it with an edge into the area of the bridge. Now this is a form shadow, but it's also really hard because that's a bony surface, and then it starts to cast a shadow. So before we get to that cast shadow, let's follow the way all the way down the nose. So first part of the nose is kind of like a cylinder, so I'm going to give a little bit of blending, and then when we get to the bottom, he's got a pretty square nose. So usually, like on the last one when we did the female, that was really soft. It's not that soft for him. It's going to be softer than this part, but I'm going to give it still a much angular feel. Then this becomes the nostril, and that I think is a little bit even more so harder, because that's just imagine how fast that form turns, right? There's not a lot of roll to it. So in here I just want to be able to show that it's light, immediate break, and then it turns under to become shadow. But I'm not ever really deviating from my line, right? So all of the lines so far in the development of the structure is just giving me these points. And over them, I'm not even really utilizing too much observation. I'm just replacing. So we have sphere, form shadow, cast shadow, box for the bridge of the eye, form shadow, little tiny cast shadow, onto the form shadow of the nose, cylinder. Maybe this at the very end could be a combination somewhere between cylinder and sphere. And then as we start to work our way back into the nose itself, I'm going to make that harder. But a good thing to double check, right, so that you don't go off the rails, is that you're always double checking your thumbnail. Right, the thumbnail is the big graphic pattern that's going to pull my viewer's attention in or my eye in and then keep them engaged. So this you want to have at the ready. That's why I'm asking you to do it on the same page so that you don't lose sight of it. Right, a lot of the time people will get lost in the rendering and the rendering becomes more important, and so the forms all start to feel like they're disassociated. And it's a big problem for lighting. So what I'm looking for you to do is maintain that, or maintain it to the best of your ability, the graphic read, and then you're just adding detail in certain areas here to give the effect of form turning, or kind of a loose idea of the forms moving around here. Oops. Okay, so let's move on into the nostril. Now I'm going to give this a sharper feel. This is a form shadow. That's the wing of the nose. Then what is the shape made by this cast shadow? Really sharp, flows over the roundness of that denture sphere. So remember, I'm always going to light this as one big volume first. So cast shadow, and as it gets towards the bottom, look how much darker it gets. So I'm going to just develop this as a ball. And when you don't do this, you can tell because the eyeballs won't look round, and it'll just be kind of like the mouth won't look round. They'll just be lips kind of floating, and that always looks really bizarre. So here's cast, form, cast again. So it's asymmetrical. Cast over the chin, and then the chin gets light from the top, but it's turning now into a form shadow. So keep in mind the way that light just kind of zigzags down the face. It's always going at directions or diagonals, and it's always going back and forth between hard and soft. Here's the jaw, and his jaw is really kind of soft, so I'm going to give it a curve and then give it a lot of edge. And before we move over here, let's do the eyebrow or the eye on this side. So this is all a cast shadow here. And so I'm tracing the cast shadow down the nose. So side of the nose is where the light's hitting. And then here it's hard edge. This is the kind of the sag of the eye. This is cast around the eye. Kind of comes up. Then we have the form shadow of the lid, and that's what's making partly the cast shadow. A little tiny light shape for that lid. And then now I'm lighting the temple. So that's maybe like a box, so a little bit of edge. And then it's going to get harder here because the turn of his brow is much more angular. So that's outline, that's done. You could add some like a hair shape. Remember, hair, just like in the last one, you just put it on like a hat or a helmet. Just think of it as a shape, and then trace how that shape goes around the underlying surfaces. So you should never be using straights here, only curves, right? C curves, S curves, anything that gives the feel that you're moving a line around that ball underneath. And if hair is too awkward or too strange looking, you don't have to deal with it. But if you do it all, just treat it as light and dark shape. That's all you should be thinking about. So all of this we would consider a map, right? It's just like little indications of continents or areas abutting or adjoining one another with irregular edges or contours. The only thing that's changing, that's different from a map, is there's hard and soft lines. Now on this side, so this block is casting a shadow on the cheek. So that's coming out this way. And look how it's an S curve. Comes out, it rolls around the cheek, like this. And then it starts to jog under, and then down into the corner of the mouth. So all the way down here. And then I'm just going to follow this back up. This is a form shadow. It's soft. That's light falling around his cheek. And then little tiny cast shadow up the cheek, just replacing that line with an edge. Cast shadow from the socket, or the brow at top, just like we did on the other eye. That goes around here and then back. The only thing I'm missing is the mouth. So now that I have the big shape, I feel comfortable doing the mouth. Here's the shadow of the lip, the upper lip, and it comes down. This has got a weird lip. I have my guideline, so I know where the mouth should end, and then he has this kind of long indent at the corner. So that's a form shadow, and then the upper lip is casting a shadow. So that's why there's a sharper line here, and then that goes across the lower lip. So it comes out, and then the lower lip becomes a form shadow. That's what that line would be. Pulls back, and then this brings us back to the chin. So that would be the first, or the second step. 1, thumbnail, actually third, sorry. 2, construction. 3, shadow mapping. And then once you get to this point, we'll just fill it in. The only difference would be in yours, just like I did with the first one, you're going to include the whole of the scene. And so you're going to be doing the frame of the background and then more of the light and darks. So here's the trick for getting the very last step, which is just filling in your masses of light and shadow. Your core shadow is almost always going to be the darkest. So when I put in my fill for whatever the shape is going to be, or whether the value is going to be, I always want to make it lighter. Otherwise it'll kind of ruin the effect of form. So notice how this value, which I'm going to try to keep consistent throughout, is lighter than the dark edges. Here, let's fill all of this in. Big brush. If you're doing this traditionally, remember, you don't want to be holding the pencil from your wrist. It's going to make this much harder than it needs to be. Contour or crosshatch drawings are much more labor intensive or time consuming than this is. So just try to get, working from the side of the pencil, one uniform value. If you're holding it from the side, excuse me, you can just kind of brush all of this in big strokes. And I want this to feel like it's even. If you're holding it from your wrist, there's a very good chance it's going to start to feel broken up, like there's a lot of tiny values inside. This one, his hair here, that's a dark value. Right, and then that would be it. You don't have to add anything. But the next step, just like I showed you on the first drawing, I didn't record because I didn't want you to be bored, but is just filling in areas of halftone to develop forms on either the light or the dark side. So if you want to develop this into something that looks more realistic, you just add more values on one side or the other, but not both. You never render the lights and the shadows. You render the lights or the shadows, because that gives your viewer a focal point. So if I want to add the lights, I'll just add just one extra value. So I've added a lighter value in between there. But this would be a great stopping point for homework, and I won't continue to go further just so you don't get confused. But you're done with the homework here.